Hello, Mac. It's John Courtney. Can't hear you if you're plugged in.
And I can't hear either. This is Lisa.
Okay, can you hear now?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Mac.
Sorry about that, guys. Remember the rule I told my speakers before we started about muting themselves and unmuting themselves? Well, I didn't unmute myself, so I apologize for that. We're going to go ahead and introduce our speakers now. I'm going to start with Lisa Brown-Alexander. Lisa is an author and recognized leader in the human resources community and nonprofit sector. She's a long-standing member of SHRM and currently serves the board of Mentoring to Manhood and the Prince George's Cultural Arts Foundation. She's also an advisory board member with the Talent Philanthropy Project. Lisa is the CEO of Nonprofit HR. That firm is located in Washington, D.C. and has been serving nonprofits for more than 15 years and has worked with prominent organizations such as Amnesty International, Greenpeace, Goodwill Industries. Her organization also produces the annual Nonprofit Talent and Culture Summit. You can find information about that event in the handout section of the GoToWebinar application. So you can download that and attend that. It's in DC, April 5th through 7th. Our second panelist this morning, John Courtney. He's the CEO and founder of NextJob. NextJob is a national organization that drives innovation in the area of reemployment solutions, which trying to make outplacement service more affordable for employers and employees. NextJob's award-winning outplacement program is actually a part of the suite of services that 501c agencies Trust offers. We began working with John and his team about this time last year to develop a solution for our members and their separated employees, and we're very proud to offer that to our members at actually no additional cost. So thanks, John, for working with us. We really appreciate it. He's an expert, has expert knowledge and has authored papers on topics such as reemployment best practices, hiring statistics, job board innovation, unemployment insurance tax structures, wage subsidy programs, and on and on. He also serves as the president of the American Institute for Full Employment, a nonprofit think tank that's developed national award-winning reemployment programs, and his organization's worked with more than 30 states and including Congress for about 2 decades. So after reading those 2 bios, you guys really make me feel like I've not done anything in my own career, but I really welcome you all to the panel today. We'll go ahead and start with Lisa. Lisa, what is the first good step for creating a retention strategy at a nonprofit organization?
Well, good afternoon, Matt, and to everyone else on the call today. We appreciate you being on the line, and this is an important topic. So I'm glad to talk about some of the first steps that are needed to building a retention strategy. The first is to know your numbers. Know how many employees you are, in fact, retaining, and how many you are turning over prematurely or unnecessarily. So what is your turnover rate? Where do you stand? What departments are people leaving from? Are there any common themes? So knowing your numbers is an important first step. Understanding the why. So what's the why for why people are leaving your organization? Why have you perhaps not been able to retain staff where you've wanted to? Understanding whether or not your organization sees talent and employees as either integral in achieving the mission or incidental, meaning, they're there, get it done, but we're not really going to invest meaningfully or purposefully in making sure that we retain talent. If somebody leaves, we'll just hire somebody else. So that's understanding what the why is for your organization is important. I would say also hiring smarter. When we work with organizations of all types and sizes, we learn that sometimes organizations don't take the time that's needed to hire in a way that ensures retention. And so hiring smarter, being more thoughtful about the hiring process, and being sure that you have the right people on board is an important part of retention. And then finally, asking those who remained with you for a long time or for a reasonable amount of time, what causes them to stay? So conducting stay interviews or retention interviews is also a really good way to building a retention strategy. So asking people what causes them to stay, what they enjoy most about where they're situated in the organization, asking them what the organization can do more effectively to keep them engaged and on board. Those are just some of the things that we recommend organizations do to start building a retention strategy.
Okay, great. John, did you have anything you wanted to add to Lisa's foundations of a good retention strategy?
Sure. Thanks, Mac. And hello, everyone. It's an honor to be part of this presentation today. I would say I really agree with Lisa. Those are, I think, perfect points. She really hit the landscape. Just from our perspective, looking at the full life cycle of employment from recruiting to exit is the key. Recruit well, hire well, motivate well. Don't forget to exit well. I think one thing that Jim Collins, the author of the best-selling management book, Good to Great, summed up nicely was he focused on just hiring right at the front end. He said the people we interviewed from the Good to Great companies clearly loved what they did, largely because they loved who they did it with. So I think that speaks to getting the right people on board who really sort of fit your culture and believe in your mission.
Outstanding, great. So we'll stay right there with you, John. Talking about the generational impact from the perspective of retention, talk a little bit about millennials and how do those younger workers decide who they want to work for and why do they stay where they're working?
Right, this is a tricky one and a very important one to get right. Mac, you know the joke about the millennial who's late to work?
No, I've not heard that one.
Well, it's a great one. His boss walks into the guy's cubicle. He says, Sage, this is the 5th time this week you've been late. Sage says, sweet, it must be Friday. So all joking aside, millennials definitely are a little bit different. They are, their age is 20 to 36 right this year, and at 75 million workers, they're now the largest generation. Yeah, and in just a few years, they're going to be 1 out of every 2 workers in the U.S. So half your workforce. And they're a different breed for sure. If you've raised one or you have one on your staff, or if you are one, you've seen it in action. So, I guess I'd ask this question. Maybe you know the answer to this quiz. How many times per day do they check their smartphones? 43 times. 43 times in a day. Here's some other fun stats that I think might help you reshape your retention policy for that half of your workforce. First, what do they want? 69% believe the office attendance is unnecessary on a regular basis. 74% want flexible work schedules, and most want to wear jeans. So I think this tells us we need to be creative about work at home and ways to measure productivity. We need to rethink some of our approaches in the workplace. Second thing is they're more sensitive to their employer relationship. 64% of millennials would rather make $40,000 a year at a job they love than $100,000 a year at a job they think is boring. Stunning. They're cause-oriented. So we pick those who are truly interested and believe in the mission, and it helps with the budget. And then I think regarding pay, unemployment is on their mind, just like the rest of us coming out of the last big recession. And as we're tipping and very close to the next recession, economists project it's going to happen in the next 2 years for sure. About 37% of 18 to 29-year-olds have been underemployed or out of work during the recession. That's the highest share of the age group in more than 30 years. So you've got a little bit of a nervous group there. Many of them think that business, 85% think that business could do a great deal or a fair amount to address unemployment. So focusing on how you exit may be also important. But here's the good news. How young workers just decide on who to work for. They're more cause-oriented, especially for nonprofits. This is helpful. You're probably seeing it. They're more focused on where they work and why. 92% believe that business success should be measured by more than just profit. They're really focused on this cause idea. 84% say that helping make a positive difference in the world is more important than professional recognition. So we want to be excellent at celebrating the wins for your mission. It not only attracts donors when you put up a great website that tells your story or a video, but it also attracts great talent. And the last thing I would say is that when they're deciding where they're going to go work, we have to pay attention to social media. 89% of them are using social media sites. On average, millennials are connected to 16 coworkers on Facebook. And the credibility of employees talking about working conditions compared to the CEO is a factor of 3. So 3 times more likely to listen to what other employees are saying, and they're doing it on websites like Glassdoor, which gives employees who've left a company an option to rate their employers. A site called Vault ranks and reviews employers, and even the big job boards, the biggest, Indeed.com, is pairing postings with employee reviews. So I think it's important to lean on the strength of your mission to attract the right people. Of course, treat them fairly, especially when they're exiting, so that when they're on social media, they're saying good things rather than negatives.
Great, thank you so much. Lisa, did you anything you want to add about millennials? I know your organization might have some data about what they like to do, what they don't like to do.
Well, we do, and there's also a lot of data out there about the millennial workforce. Tons of stuff, as a matter of fact. Some of it I think is a little bit hokey, but others of it, and much of what John just said, is really true. So our research and data tell us that millennials particularly want flexibility. I remain kind of surprised at the number of nonprofits that are not willing to offer flexible work schedules where it makes sense. Obviously, if someone's working in direct service, if they're working directly with the client or the service recipient, flexibility may not always work. But with organizations where they're not delivering direct service in the community, flexible schedules often can work, and I'm surprised at the number of leaders who are still resistant to flexible workplaces. I would also say that millennials want to be engaged in decision making. They want to be engaged in their missions beyond their own individual jobs. So that's something that's really important to the millennial workforce. They care about culture and they care about cause. So if your organization has a great cause, but the internal culture is suffering, that will have a direct connection to your ability to retain staff, because culture does matter to the millennial workforce. And then finally, what we're seeing in organizations as well is an increased focus on millennials wanting to know what an organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion practices are. They're asking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're not just talking about people who are diverse wanting to know this, but everyone is wanting to know, how does your organization stand on issues around LGBT the workforce? Do you have older people working in your organization? How do you embrace diversity of thought? And if your organization doesn't have a clear statement around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or clear practices or conflicting practices, that can be a deterrent to retaining the millennial workforce. They really do care about how organizations show up when it comes to DEI.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So, and you talked a little bit about culture when you were talking about millennials just now. Why don't you go ahead and dive further into the workplace dynamics that affect employee retention?
Well, we all know that the common phrase is people don't leave organizations, they leave supervisors. And so one of the most important workplace dynamics affecting employee retention is the employee-supervisor relationship. Here again, sometimes as nonprofit professionals and leaders, we're reticent to take action against supervisors who are ineffective. And sometimes we're hesitant at the cost of losing staff. So when we see departments turn over and over again, when people come in and go out repeatedly over a period of time, but we haven't addressed the elephant on the table, which is sometimes the supervisor. That can be a real problem. So we need to be mindful of what employee-supervisor relationships look like and help supervisors really develop the skills that they need to be effective people managers. They may be really, really good at the technical components of their job, but sometimes they need some help with the softer skills and providing them with the professional development that they need to be as effective on the technical side as they are on the people side is important. So I would say the employee-supervisor relationship is a key dynamic of employee retention. I would also say that organizational culture is a key dynamic of retention. We do a lot of work here at Nonprofit HR around culture needs assessments, helping organizations understand what their culture is and isn't. And oftentimes culture, ineffective cultures or unhealthy workplace cultures serve as a driver for retention and turnover. So if there are some toxic elements to your workplace culture, if leadership doesn't communicate effectively, if people don't have a sense of belonging to their organization, if they don't feel connected to each other, all of those elements can contribute to both retention and turnover. So those are just some of the workplace culture elements that should be addressed deliberately and intentionally. Have we lost you, Mac? I think we may have lost Mac. I'll just say one more word about culture. If you're not clear about your organization's culture, I would strongly encourage you to engage staff in understanding it better. Gather focus groups of staff that represent the full diversity of your workforce and ask them very specific questions about their perceptions of the culture, the things that cause them to want to stay, the things that might want to drive or that could potentially contribute to their early departure. Those are things that many organizations don't take the time to understand. And increasingly, culture is a differentiator between organizations that can attract really dynamic talent and those who cannot, including those in the nonprofit sector. So if ABC job applicant is comparing your nonprofit with the nonprofit up the street, and they begin to ask questions about, tell me about the culture here, how do people get along with each other, how are decisions made, and your organization is not in a healthy place, that could be, you can not have a competitive advantage. So culture really does matter and is a key component of retention. Mac, do we have you back?
It looks like he actually lost power there for a second.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll jump right in.
I was just going to say, let's.
Yeah, Lisa, I love your comments there. Just the toxicity and getting to the core root, especially with supervisors. Thinking about how we apply some of that in our own organization. I would just add one thing, just as an example. We run Next Job very much like a nonprofit, even though it's a for-profit. We're very social, mission-driven, and we found that sometimes weaving all of these things together really reinforces things. I didn't. One of our great team members had an idea to just do something very simple. She said, look, when we have a hire in our company, when we get somebody back to work, we're going to send out an email from that job coach, very anonymously describing the job seeker, but describing what happened, how the person landed the job, and celebrating. They send that to every employee in the company. And so we're all getting these little wins all the time. She coupled with that a quarterly bonus. It was very small. It might be a $25 Amazon card. But it's amazing how much it has reinforced culture to say, look, we're focused on this idea of getting people back to work. That's our mission. We're going to celebrate every time we do by sharing the stories. And we're going to tie it into compensation as well. And it's amazing how just a little bit goes a long way to reinforce the culture and the mission and all of the things that add up to culture. So I think our next question is retention is a strength. And the question is, why is retention a key component of a successful nonprofit? What's the point? I think, Lisa, you're going to have some interesting things to say on this. I just have three quick thoughts on it from our perspective. The first is that turnover is expensive in nonprofits, just as it is for any employer. But of course, nonprofits don't have the budget flexibility. The second is that nonprofits, it's often hard on culture when someone leaves. I've seen often there's a question that comes to mind among donors and others of, you know what, did that person leave because they didn't believe in the mission enough to stay? But if they have a good experience and they leave, then they can be a great reference. And so I think the last thing I would say is that retention is key, sometimes even in fundraising, because those who are connected with staff can be donors. And oftentimes they can influence donors, even if they're not directly connected. Donors like continuity, and it seems that we more often find that nonprofit missions are long-term in nature. And so they often benefit greatly from longer tenured employee carrying out that mission and all the nuances of it that developed over the years. I'd be interested, Lisa, in your thoughts. I know you've lived in this space for a long time.
Yeah, you know, I completely agree with you. I think that, you know, organizations have to see retention as a priority. While some measure of turnover is certainly healthy, you don't want people kind of staying forever and perhaps losing touch with best practices outside of their industry or their subsector. But I would say that paying attention to retention should be a strategic priority. What we have found in our research is that many nonprofits still struggle with prioritizing talent management at any level. It's incidental, it happens after the fact, it's not something that is tied to organizational strategy. We hope to get the best people and we hire whoever we can for whatever price we can within our limited budgets. And that tends to be, in some organizations, the approach to talent. And so retention is a function of good talent management, but you have to first understand the value of talent as it relates to achieving your mission. When an organization does that, prioritizing retention usually comes closer to the top. So I would say that organizational mission achievement can be attained more effectively when you're not facing issues of consistent turnover. As you said, John, it's, you know, you're not spending unnecessarily dollars hiring and rehiring, training and retraining, but you in fact can get a better return on your investment when you can keep people for a period of time and they can really be impactful with the organization. Turnover costs, and you know, most nonprofits are not working with an unlimited budget, and there's a real cost, both a hard dollar cost and a soft dollar cost associated with turnover that can be avoided. And quite honestly, those monies can be redirected in other ways when retention is a priority. Right.
That's good. I know Mac is in a snowstorm in Virginia. He had a power outage. I don't know if I love that last picture. My neck is hurting just watching, looking at it here. Lisa, I think the next question was what types of employees are organizations having the hardest time retaining? What do you see there?
Yeah, so for the last several years, since 2007, Nonprofit HR has been conducting the Nonprofit Employment Practices Survey. And that survey is a compilation of hiring, retention, and other talent-related practices across the nonprofit sector. In the 2016 survey, we learned that the hardest positions to retain, and this has been the case for several years now, are those positions in the direct services industry or sector. So individuals who are providing direct care to individuals in the community. Typically, they're in the social sector or social services subsector, people working in healthcare, elder care, child care, community services working with youth, the disabled. Those positions are really tough jobs. They oftentimes don't pay well. And so folks will be prone to leave nonprofit A for nonprofit B for $1 or $2 more per hour. Those jobs are demanding. And so we see that the direct service community has the highest or the lowest retention rates in the social services, and direct services tends to be the hardest jobs to retain. They're followed by fundraising and development. Part of the reason for that is because fundraising and development professionals can typically set their own salaries. Those who are good, those who deliver results, can go from organization to organization, and they are seen as kind of the price champions in many nonprofit organizations, particularly those that are heavily dependent on corporate dollars, individual donors versus membership revenue or revenue generated from annual conferences. So we see this more in non-association clients, that they are heavily dependent on fundraising and development professionals, and those are the second hardest positions to retain, followed by program management and support. If you want more details about the types of positions that are difficult to retain, you can download a copy of the 2016 Employment Practices Survey from our website at nonprofithr.com. But we've been producing that report every year since 2007, so we've got some good longitudinal data that organizations can look at. Social services or direct services has remained in the top 3 for almost the entire time we've been collecting this data.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. I'm back. Sorry about that. We did have the power go down, so I appreciate you guys just running with it. And we'll send a copy of that survey that Lisa's organization does to all the attendees today. So we'll send you all a link in our follow-up email. John, did you have something you wanted to add to these retention difficulties?
Sure, just a quick note. I think it was very helpful to hear Lisa's research on understanding who is typically going to be difficult to retain. It's one of those gut checks of, am I crazy here? Do we have a bad manager, or is it the nature of the job? And I think that's great discernment. I would say just one additional thing. When we're coaching, and I'll just give it to you from the job seeker side, sometimes we have job seekers that want to work for a nonprofit, or they want to work for a certain company, and they just can't get the pay at that company to stay in the job. And we often coach them in that situation to follow your passion, if you can, and find a creative way to make it work. And sometimes they're finding that they can work part-time for an organization that they just love, doing what they absolutely love, and then part-time for another organization doing something they're not overly passionate about, but where they make a lot more money. And they're balancing in this new sort of economy where it's more of a gig economy, more of a multiple job economy. We're finding job seekers have a lot of success with that, and over time they build up their worth so that they can go into a nonprofit maybe and be adding enough value that they can be paid enough to really generate the income that they need.
Great, thank you. So now we'll kind of, John, why don't you keep going? Talk about, you all have mentioned a couple of times about how it's a complete strategy from hiring all the way to separations when you talk about retention. Retention doesn't exist in its own bubble as part of an overall program. Can you talk a little bit about the separation process, how that impacts retention?
Sure, yeah. So I think the first thing to understand, and I think we all know it intuitively, that job loss it really ranks up there behind death or a major illness of a family member as one of life's stresses, or divorce. It's equivalent to the death of a close friend. And in many ways, the job loss is the loss of a close friend. All your connections, the work you did. It's a major life disruption. So there's a lot of fear. The fear is a lot greater now because of the recession. We have record numbers of people who have not rejoined the workforce from it. Our long-term unemployed are still at 2 million nationwide. That's at the high of the level from the prior recession, not the low. So it's not recovering very quickly. And everyone knows someone who's lost a job and had a really sort of terrible time. And we also spend a lot of time with the long-term unemployed. We work with banks who are helping homeowners go back to work instead of face foreclosure. And they're telling us, you know, at 18 months out, 2 years out, they're just in shock, depressed, lots of bad things happening. So in this process of a layoff, which is normal, there are a lot of layoffs in the economy. 145 million workers will have, somewhere on the order of 15 million layoffs a year, 10 million layoffs a year. So it's going to happen, and there are going to be other separations. The key is, how do we handle it? So often best HR practices will tell us to take away the phone, take away contacts, notify them on a Friday, give them a very short period of time, get them out the door. And that's necessary in some cases with sensitive materials and sensitive situations. In many other cases, it's not necessary. So the key is to think carefully about your practices. Ask yourself the question, how do I balance being as humane as possible with following the HR guidance that keeps us out of trouble? And then the key is, it's not just the person laid off and what they're going to say on social media and how that all may go. It is the employees who remain. They'll watch and they wonder if they're next, especially in the shortage in funding. It can be a terrible environment of fear and really disruptive to the company culture. They all wonder, they all know, this is a great organization when times are good. But the real test is what happens when times are bad. They want to know how you're going to act. They feel like that's going to show your true colors. So the key there then, Mac, is to make the most of it and think about how to make a nice transition. One key is to be as communicative as possible. You don't want to send people out the door if you might have your funding come back and you've just seen a small bump. But if you know the layoff's coming, the key is to let them know ahead of time, give them as much notice as possible, try to be creative in how you work through that. If they've been good, give them a great recommendation. And consider outplacement is now affordable for many companies, and we think for just about any employee.
Great, thanks. Lisa, is there anything you want to add about how you separate from employees and how that affects retention?
I do. I think John's raised some really good points. I think the only thing I would want to add is just the real importance of, kind of compassionate separation. No one wants to terminate an employee, right? That's always a difficult and painful thing to do. How you do it, I think, can completely impact not only the individual being affected, but it can also impact the rest of the organization. Obviously, in most cases, you can't share the why, but what you can do is send clear messages to the staff that remain about the importance of maintaining someone's dignity, maintaining their reputation, even if they left under less than stellar circumstances. Communicating, using someone's termination as an opportunity to communicate your commitment to maintaining a healthy and positive workplace. Those are all important messages to convey as part of the separation process. Yes, separation costs, both from a productivity and a kind of a morale standpoint, but you can mitigate some of the costs or some of the loss by handling the terminations in a way that's compassionate and caring.
Great, thank you. So we'll stay right there with you, Lisa, and talk a little bit about advancement. We did get a question submitted by an attendee before the session began when she registered. Talked about the problem of retaining staff after you had a difficult recruitment. If you're in a difficult area, difficult kind of job. We know some nonprofits have very stressful situations. Can you talk a little bit about keeping people when it was hard to get them on board to begin with?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is where flexibility becomes essential. If you're in Wyoming, I'm looking at the picture, and that's the only reason I'm picking on Wyoming is because this picture reminds me of Wyoming, back in the 1800s. If you're in a remote location or you're in an area that there's not a large talent pool, being flexible with the people that you do hire, I think, is an essential strategy to keeping and retaining staff, right? So to the extent that someone might need to work a slightly different schedule than everyone else, or work from home one day a week, or there are likely things that you could do to accommodate the needs of a hard-to-fill position and a hard-to-fill professional that will encourage them to stay. Just to give you an example, we had an employee with us who started out, and she lived here in the DC area, but her husband was relocated to upstate New York. We could have said to her, you know what, since you can't work in DC, we can't keep you. Instead, we made the decision to allow her to work from upstate New York, and it's worked out really, really well. And it's conveyed to her our commitment to retaining her. She is more engaged than ever. And it's a win-win situation for everyone. Now, I recognize that every organization is not in that situation, but if you can be flexible, ask the question of that hard to retain or hard to recruit position, what do you need to remain with us? How can we ensure that this is the best experience for you as possible? And then be responsive to the extent that you can with the answers that they give you. That would be my advice, Mac.
Great advice. John, do you have anything you want to add to Lisa's discussion there?
Sure. Well, I can tell you, Mac, one thing that didn't work in my nonprofit. My first nonprofit job was in one of these spots. It actually kind of looked a lot like the picture here without the wagons. And before the job, I asked what the town had to offer, and the tourist information staff told me, well, we've got 300 days of sunshine a year here. And being from Pittsburgh, I thought, great, we've got the other 65. And so I took the job. I thought sunshine was going to be great. I was in my early 30s. I was unmarried. After about 4 years, I was ready to move to a place where I might actually find a wife. And I told my boss, and a month later, he came up with a great idea to retain me. Set me up on a date with his granddaughter, which was creative. And get this, his idea was a Valentine's Day date with him and his wife and the girl's mother. So, I guess you might call that an extreme type of internal promotion. It didn't quite work out that way. And he eventually let me move, just to Lisa's example, 2.5 hours away, with the condition that I'd come down for a regular Monday meeting, and that eventually moved to monthly and quarterly. And that flexibility, which wasn't typical for that company, made a huge difference. And after 14 years staying with the nonprofit, it became a great relationship. But I would say it was due to, back to an earlier point that Lisa made, people don't leave organizations, they leave supervisors. He was a great boss, and he took a genuine interest in his team. And the idea of setting me up with his granddaughter wasn't quite the right thing, but it was really from the heart, and it was because he was really interested.
I can imagine all the HR pros on the call right now were just shaking their head, going, no, about setting you up with the granddaughter.
Yeah.
But it's, like you said, it was original. So let's stay with you. Your team does do outplacement. We know you're not going to give us a commercial or anything, but talk to us a little bit about how managing separations, which you've talked a little bit about, how managing separations helps retain, but give us a little bit more indication about, because nonprofits don't often think about outplacement and services that can be available when separating and how that adds to the overall cultural value of the organization.
Right. Well, there's good news here, Mac. You know, a lot of things have changed in the last 10 or 20 years, but one of the huge changes has been an outplacement, and it's a little known change. It used to be that outplacement were providing some sort of reemployment help upon a separation, whether it was a layoff or whether it was just a termination for cause. It used to be that only you would receive a package that included a one-on-one coach, only if you were a manager or an executive. There was a good reason for that. There was a good reason nonprofits didn't use it much. It was typically paying $3,000 to $6,000, sometimes $10,000 for a package. That might be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And then if the other employees received any help, it's typically a half-day seminar on site while the employees were still in shock, and it was sort of a data dump. And you know the retention of a long 5-hour session of learning anything is extremely low. I think it's in the 5 or 10% range. So fortunately, the big change is this. Just at the time that job seekers are really starting to do more of their work online when they do a job search, there was a great opportunity to bring to the market the idea of wrapping together phone-based coaching instead of brick-and-mortar coaching, which all of Outplacement had been, and then wrapping that together with online learning. And so 10 years ago, we put together a program like that, and there were a couple others in the industry that have since put together similar type programs. And the good news is that prices have come down dramatically. So what you might have seen at a $2,000, $2,500 price, now on the $1,000 to $1,500 range. You can buy a 2-month package for $600 or $700. So it's really affordable. The second huge innovation, I think, is that there is a true dollar return on investment now. And many firms they're not only focusing on providing services efficiently, but they're also focused on the idea that it's not about just the out, getting people out, making sure they don't file a lawsuit, making sure that they don't make anybody mad or disrupt the goodwill of the company with the employees that remain. There's a real focus now on the employment outcomes, and there's better tracking. And so the key is, instead of looking backwards at their last job, the focus is to develop a relationship, to work through the shock and the negative feelings that get people stuck, and then keep them moving and land them much faster than they used to be, maybe twice as fast. So what does that really mean to a nonprofit? What's interesting, Mac, there's now an opportunity for a true dollar return on investment. And so what do I mean by that? Well, because nonprofits pay unemployment claims based on how long a person is laid off, they have an opportunity to shorten those claims by getting a person a job faster. So instead of the average claim, $5,000 coming back against a nonprofit in a layoff for every laid off person, the opportunity is to reduce that claim by $1,000 or $2,000 in unemployment costs. And that's more than enough to pay for an outplacement package. And so it's this sort of huge win-win that's come out of the marketplace, and it's a dramatic change.
Great. Yeah, I know that John's organization does work with ours, with 501c Agencies Trust, and we do offer their services to all of our members. So they've seen great benefit in their retention strategies by being able to exit employees with options, which helps, with the employer brand and everything. So Lisa, we're getting into the questions section now, and I'll go ahead and start, Lisa, with our first question. Please send those in. You can chat them directly to me in the chat window, or you can throw them into the questions application portion of the GoToWebinar. We have about 10 minutes left. We'll answer as many as possible. Also, I'll go ahead and reiterate, since we had some issues at the beginning of the broadcast talking about everybody's recertification credits. If you're doing through HRCI or through SHRM, this session is worth 1 hour credit for both organizations, but you have to complete our post-event survey. That will pop up when we're done, and you'll also get it by email later today. So you need to complete that for me before I can send anybody any credit. And we'll just send that as the questions come in, or talk about that a little bit as the questions come in. So, Lisa, we had to have one come in to my chat window here. An HR department, they're in Tennessee. They have staff overseas, and of course, you know, that makes it very hard to engage with those people. There's different kinds of workplace dynamics. They've thought a little bit about instituting some kind of 360-degree evaluation, but that we're afraid that they're afraid they might get results that are negative because these people don't see each other. Can you talk a little bit about the virtual office place and how to, you know, that's a difficult dynamic. I know not all nonprofits have the ability to do that, but, you know, do you have any suggestions to overcoming that kind of location barrier?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My advice would be to, you know, the nonprofit technology, the price of technology has come down so much so that the barrier for entry and, you know, for using technology is really a issue these days. I would leverage things like Skype and other types of technology that allow for face-to-face communication. That can sometimes be a challenge with time differences. Sometimes there are language differences. But we work with a number of global nonprofits that have operations here in the US, but also have operations around the world. And they are very deliberate about how they use technology to close the geographical gap. So I would strongly encourage that as a first step. In terms of the 360 review process, that's always a really effective way to get perspective from multiple people about an individual's performance and effectiveness. And when you can't see someone, when you don't have the opportunity to observe their individual performance, but others do, that has real value to making sure that the feedback process is as effective as possible. Now, I think many of you know that the world is shifting away from event-driven performance reviews to more of a continuous feedback model, where conversation is happening on an ongoing basis about performance and where things are working and where they're not. But that notwithstanding, the use of technology and the use of 360s can be both instrumental in helping an organization get a better sense, a clearer sense for individual performance. We may have lost Mac again. I don't know if we have any other questions.
I'm here. I'm sorry.
You're there. Okay.
John, you talked a little bit about millennials earlier today. You dropped a statistic in there about how many times they check their phones. When you're talking about organizations that are in a direct care field, and it's really hard to keep people off phones and away from devices and focusing on the jobs that they have. Do you have any advice for getting employees to focus better, including millennials?
Sure. Yeah. A good question, Mac. And I think it's a real challenge in a lot of organizations. It's a difficult thing to resist. And I can tell you in our own organization, we are dispersed. We're, I think, in 22 states with our employees. They're all working virtually. And they're all connected constantly. I think really the key for us has been developing some really great measurable outcomes that we're looking for from the work. And I think that's is true of millennials. They're looking for, as most people are, expectations that they need to meet. They want a manager to say, look, I don't care how you get this done. If you're hitting your goals, I'm happy. And in the past, that could be very disruptive. And so in the direct care workers in particular, which our workers are, as they're coaching people who are unemployed, depressed, their life coaching, for us, we have a number of metrics and check-ins, and it has to do with relationship. measures, we survey, and find out how those who are receiving services are feeling about the services. We have a way to monitor and find out how they're doing with their outcomes, getting people back to work and getting them on the path to get back to work. So I think all of those things build into sort of not only expectations, but as a way to understand, are they getting distracted by their devices? And are they going in different directions?
Gotcha.
But I'd be curious what Lisa would add to that.
Sorry, I had muted myself. No, I totally agree. I don't know that I have anything to add, John. I think you're spot on. Spot on.
Okay, so Lisa, to stick with you, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. We're talking about innovative ways to change our work environment, change the office culture for recruitment and retention. You know, anything that you're seeing that you like, or anything that you're seeing that you don't like that may have been that's new in the past couple of years. A couple of things. You know, we talked about the 360-degree reviews. What about stay interviews? You know, that kind of thing. And how about stuff in the office like mediation rooms and dynamic workplaces? Is there anything out there you're seeing you like, and then anything out there you're seeing that you don't like?
Yeah, I really like the stay interview. I think exit interviews have proven themselves to be less information rich than a stay interview. Stay interviews are intended to understand why people stay, and they provide information to organizations about how they should continue to invest in the workplace to make sure that people continue to stay. So I think that information is incredibly valuable when compared with getting information from people once they've left the organization. In many instances, they don't want to talk to their previous employer. So there are some challenges associated with exit interviews that I don't think we see with stay interviews. So that's one thing. I think those are definitely increasing in their popularity and in their frequency of use. 360s have been around for a while, so I don't know that that's a new trend. I would say the other trend is employee resource groups and the use of more decision-making with employees. So cross-functional project teams, people working together in a way that fosters positive workplace culture. We see that. We see more organizations wanting to really, in fact, understand what their culture is about. So we're seeing more and more nonprofits engage in formal cultural needs assessments. I'm amazed at how many people, how many leaders have a particular impression of their cultures. And when we do the work to understand what's going on, it's very different from what the leadership perceives. And so where we are seeing more interest and engagement around cultural needs assessments. Those are just three that come to top of mind.
Well, that's great. John, did you have any you wanted to add, or?
No, I'm learning here. I guess I would add one thing we've experimented with, and of course we're in this virtual environment, so I guess it's maybe more of an extreme test, but it's just to build connection with each other. We've set up a time for our employees to connect with each other. We call it a coffee chat, and so their job is to get on the phone and spend 30 minutes with someone they don't know in the company very well, who they'd like to get to know better. And so we do those on a regular basis, and over time it tends to knit more people together in the company, and so they're now, I guess, a little more personally connected. And I just reflecting on Lisa's comment about resource groups, which we use as well, it seems to have deepened the opportunity for relationships.
Great. Okay, so I'm gonna. We do have quite a few questions in the queue, but I'm gonna give us one more here and try to combine a couple here. We've seen a couple of questions, and I'll just open it up to both of you about the issues with direct staff, direct support professionals, those in the nonprofit sector who are on the front lines. I'm not as much of an expert as the two of you are, but I would think that those are the highest stress positions. And we're seeing a lot of questions and concerns about, is there any innovative approach to help my organization maintain these folks? Because I'm sure there's a lot of training that goes on, and then you get somebody who's really good at it, They do a great job. They're really helping the mission, and you're really concerned about keeping that person in there. You know, we've talked a little bit about advancement. Is there anything in a nutshell you can give these groups that have these direct staff that are in these high stress positions? It's really hard to keep folks there, especially millennials, especially baby boomers as they start to age out. What can we give these folks as we sign off here that can help them with these direct personnel?
I tell you what, Mac, the thing that comes to mind, it's so simple but so overlooked. Listen. Listen to what your frontline staff are telling you they need and respond to it. Sometimes the things that they need to make life better are simple. And the simple things that we can do to keep them engaged with organizations they really love, but they're stressed and they're drained. And so listen and respond to whatever you can to make their lives easier. Get your organization to understand the cost of turnover, and spending a little bit more on making sure that people are happy and connected and engaged is probably a less of a spend than it is to replace that person. That's my advice. John, all yours.
Yeah, you know, we've got direct service people and we're dealing with long-term unemployed, and so it's a really tough go. We've faced this in the past 2 years, and I would agree with Lisa, that listening is key. You triggered in my mind that we changed some of our procedures about how we go about things, and we knew where we would draw lines on the harder to serve people and assess whether they were going to be people we could help, or whether they were going to be people who we were not going to be able to help and would burn our team out. So that listening and just analyzing how you're doing things is key. And the other thing I would add is look for ways to give the person a break. If they can move in and do some other type of work in the organization for a spell, just take a sabbatical for a little period of time, or look for ways that you can mix up their jobs so that they are, have more people doing part-time on the front line and then part-time in the office. So mixing up and diversifying the work can also really help and has helped for us.
Yeah, building a culture of self-care, that's really what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Promoting self-care and telling people it's okay to take time for you, that's key.
Excellent. Well, thank both of you, and thanks to everybody who's attended today. I know we had our technical issues, and I apologize for those. Please follow up with the survey when you're done so that I can get you your recertification credit if that's what you're looking for. And like I said, there will be a copy of the presentation, the slides, and the audio-visual portion, a copy of that, emailed to everybody later today. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you'll come back next month, and have a great week, everybody. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.